I used to think family dinners were supposed to feel warm. On the night of my parents' 46th anniversary, the air inside the Scottsdale Steakhouse felt colder than the marble floor. The private room was dressed in soft gold light and low jazz, the kind of place where couples whispered and waiters walked like shadows. I arrived early with my son, Noah, 9 years old, quiet fingers pressed into my hand as if he needed permission to breathe in front of these people. I carried a framed photograph, a restored copy of my parents' wedding picture from 1979. Sepia-tone soft edges, two young people in love. I set it on the table next to my mother, Diane. She glanced at it just long enough for her eyes to move past the glass, then she slid it to the side like a menu she was done with. My father, Richard, lifted his fork and kept chewing. My sister Tessa was already seated with her husband, Doug. Their two boys lounged like emperors in a booth built for important people. Plates of appetizers sat in front of them, shrimp cocktail and sliders stacked high. I helped Noah unfold his napkin. He whispered, "Can I just have chicken tenders?" I nodded. "Anything you want, buddy." When the waiter reached our table, pen ready, Tessa leaned back in her chair as if she had been waiting for her cue. "We did not save him a plate," she said. She pointed her chin toward Noah, her voice smooth and light like she was talking about the weather. My father added, "Bread builds character." My mother stared at the menu, pretending not to hear a thing. Noah dropped his eyes and rubbed his thumb along the seam of his shirt the way he did when he was trying not to look hurt. There was a silence, the kind that seems small but fills the entire room. I felt the heat rise behind my ribs, but I did not raise my voice. I looked directly at Tessa and said one word, "Noted." Doug leaned toward her and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "She is not going to do anything. She never does. She is the responsible one." They started eating. Thick slabs of ribeye were placed in front of them, $150 a portion butter, melting across the crust. The smell filled the room, and Noah sat with an empty setting water glass untouched. The waiter returned with a smile, asking if we were ready to order. I stood. The chair scraped the floor, and every conversation in the room seemed to stop breathing. Cancel anything not yet fired. Everything already cooking goes to my father's tab. For my son, the ribeye 12 ounces truffle fries a Coke. The waiter blinked like he was not sure if he heard correctly, then nodded. "Yes, of course." I sat back down. Tessa rolled her eyes. Drama queen. I did not look at her. Receipts tell the story. Noah looked up at me, unsure if he should smile or hide. I broke a piece of bread and put it on his plate. "Eat, honey. We are fine." No one spoke for minutes, only knives tapping plates in the distance. I felt my phone buzz, a text from Tessa under the table. "You owe for his meal." I did not reply. I could feel something shifting the same way you feel a storm before the clouds appear. Watching them eat while my child waited was the moment I understood something. They had grown comfortable, humiliating us. They thought I would always stay quiet. They thought silence meant acceptance. When the waiter placed the ribeye in front of Noah, his eyes widened. The smell, the steam, the way the fries crackled on the plate. He picked up his fork, almost shy, like he was afraid someone would take it away. I watched him eat, and something inside me settled. It was not anger. It was clarity. Later, when the check arrived, the waiter walked straight to my father. He looked confused, embarrassed, then red with anger. He signed it anyway. My mother whispered, "This did not have to be a scene." Tessa scoffed. "You always ruin everything." I lifted the restored wedding photo and placed it gently in the center of the table. Happy anniversary. Noah stood up beside me, small shoulders squared, and we walked out without another word. Outside, the desert night was cool. Noah squeezed my hand. "Mom, were you scared?" I looked down at him. "No, baby. I was done." At home, I tucked him into bed. My phone lit up with missed calls, angry messages, a voicemail from my father accusing me of disrespect. I poured a glass of water and let the quiet fill the living room. For the first time, the quiet felt like safety instead of punishment. Before I fell asleep, I wrote one sentence in my notes app. If you treat my child like he is invisible, you do not get access to us. The next morning, a bill was taped to my door. $1,200. Pay your share. I stared at it, then smiled the smallest smile. Noted. If you have ever watched your child be treated like they do not matter, tell me where you are listening from. In March of 2025, my apartment in Tempe felt smaller than usual, maybe because the silence had started to feel crowded. Noah was asleep in his room with his little desk lamp still glowing a half-built STEM kit on the floor beside his bed. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a spreadsheet glowing back at me rows of numbers that told a story no one in my family ever cared to hear. Being responsible does not sound heavy when people say it, but responsibility has weight, and every cell in that spreadsheet was another brick on my shoulders. Growing up, Tessa was the delicate one, the one who needed breaks, the one who needed space, the one who needed defending. Our mother, Diane, would say gently, "Tessa is sensitive. She needs more help." Then she would turn to me and say, "Leah is strong. She does not need fussing." People think calling a child strong is a compliment, but what it really means is that no one is coming to pick you up when you fall. Strength becomes the excuse used to ignore you. It followed me into adulthood like a permanent name tag. When something needed doing, it always landed in my lap, and if I said no, I was dramatic or ungrateful. I stared at the column labeled AT&T Family Plan. 4 lines. Mine, Tessa's, Doug's, and 1 extra for their oldest kid's tablet. I had asked quietly for Tessa to pay her share for months. She promised every time. Still 3 months behind. Every new bill felt like proof that responsibility was just another word for free labor. I scrolled to the electric bill from February. SRP $242.87. A text from Tessa popped up in my mind as clearly as if she had just sent it. "Can you spot me again?" The word "again" was the part that stung. I sent the money without debate because Noah needed light, and I could not risk a late fee or a shutoff while raising him alone. There was a line for kids' birthdays. I remembered taking Tessa's boys to the SciTech Discovery Center. $85 for ticket, snacks, and a little kit they insisted on having. They ran through the exhibits laughing, chasing each other, and at the end Tessa picked them up, scrolling her phone, barely nodding when I told her it had gone well. No mention of paying me back, no thank you, just an unspoken assumption that I would cover it because that was what I always did. I looked around my apartment at the things that were mine and the quiet that was ours. My couch had a small tear on the side from years of use, but it was clean. My fridge hummed softly. 1 magnet held Noah's honor roll certificate. My life was simple and steady, and I protected it fiercely because it was the one thing in my world not touched by the chaos my family carried. I opened my email, sorting through unread messages, and that was when I saw it. A notification from the bank labeled UTMA activity. My breath thinned. The UTMA account was a small savings built after Noah was born. It was supposed to be safe a place for his future, a place no one could treat like pocket change. I clicked. The page loaded too slowly. When it opened, the words on the screen were plain but devastating. A withdrawal of $4,800 dated early March, transferred to the account of Douglas Hale. The memo line read, "Family Fix." For a full minute, I did not move. I just stared at those numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. My father, Richard, had been the custodian on that account. It meant he had access, but only to act in Noah's interest. $4,800 was not a small mistake. It was intent. I clicked screenshot, saved it, and then I screenshotted again just to be sure. I did not call my parents. I did not confront Tessa. Experience had taught me that outrage would only give them something to mock later. Instead, I opened a new email draft and typed to a contact saved months earlier. Karen Liu, attorney. The subject line read, "UT May withdrawal." I attached the screenshot and wrote 1 short sentence. Should this have happened? Her reply came faster than I expected. "UT May withdrawal without beneficiary interest is actionable. Keep records." That was it. Legal words clean and calm. Actionable. Keep records. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. Somewhere in the apartment above mine, someone dropped a pan and laughed. Life carried on outside the walls, and yet everything in me felt paused. I poured myself water and stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. A tired woman. But not weak. Responsible did not mean powerless. I lifted my phone and took pictures of the bills on the table, the AT&T charges, the SRP statement, the receipts from the museum. I labeled each folder with dates. I was not angry. I was done pretending nothing was wrong. Around midnight, I walked downstairs to the mailbox cluster under the stairs. The desert air was dry and cold. The box was stuffed with envelopes most routine, but one caught my eye. A late notice from my apartment leasing office. I frowned. I never missed rent. I opened it right there under the dim security light. The notice said the forwarding address on file had changed. Someone had listed my apartment as a billing address for another account, and unpaid statements were being sent here. And the name on the sender was not mine. It was Tessa Hale. She had used my address again to avoid facing her own overdue bills. The leasing office wanted clarification. For the first time in months, I laughed, not a happy laugh, but a tired and sharp one, because the pattern was so obvious I could have drawn it in my sleep. My sister's chaos had a habit of spilling into my quiet life without warning. I walked back upstairs, letter in hand, and pinned it to the side of my fridge with the same magnet that held Noah's honor roll certificate. The two papers sat side by side, one proof of his achievement and the other proof of my sister's entitlement. The contrast could not have been clearer. I returned to my laptop and opened a blank note. I typed the date, March 2025. Below it, I wrote one sentence. Temporary, but not forever. I closed the laptop. I checked on Noah. His hair was messy against the pillow chest, rising slow and steady. I kissed his forehead and whispered the words I wished someone had said to me when I was a kid. You do not have to earn love by being strong. You can just be a child. I turned off the lamp and stood at the doorway for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. Responsibility had been welded to my identity for so long, but that night something inside me shifted. Quietly, without fireworks or shouting. A beginning, a decision, a line forming in the sand, and this time they would not see me coming. In April of 2025, the church picnic near Phoenix was supposed to feel like a family celebration. Spring sun warmed the grass-folding chairs, sunk slightly into the dirt, and kids chased each other between the picnic tables. People carried trays of food and greeted neighbors, and everyone seemed happy to be there. Everyone except Noah, who sat quietly beside me with a PB&J sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. He peeled at the crust and tried to pretend he did not notice the catering table set up for Tessa's kids, complete with boxes of steaming pizza wings and a cooler full of soft drinks. I had offered to bring something fresh, but Diane told me not to worry, and then somehow my son was the only child without a real meal. Doug walked by carrying 2 paper plates stacked with slices and said loudly, "Noah can share the crusts. Kids do not care." A few people laughed politely as if it was a harmless joke, but I saw Noah's shoulders fold inward. He asked nothing and reached quietly for his sandwich. The church choir director passed by and complimented Tessa on the spread. Tessa smiled like a celebrity accepting an award. She said we wanted the best for our children. She made sure to say our children even though Noah sat not 10 feet away with a lunch that cost less than $1. The pastor's wife came over to greet everyone, and Richard took the chance to brag about his grandchildren. He pointed to Tessa's kids lined up at the pizza table and told her proudly, "These little ones have big futures." Then he gestured at Noah without even looking at him and added, "Leah's boy is used to a simple life. He always says she has the budget face that keeps everyone grounded." The pastor's wife smiled awkwardly. She clearly did not know what to say. I felt heat rise in my neck, not anger exactly, but something numb and silent. Diane leaned in beside me and whispered, "Some kids do not need seconds." It sounded gentle if you ignored the meaning. I pretended not to hear. Noah wiped his hands on his jeans and sipped water from a bottle he brought from home. My fingers tightened around my phone. I opened the Notes app and typed the date, the location, and the exact sentences spoken. I did not argue. I did not cry. I saved every word. Tessa later set up her phone on a little tripod and started live streaming. She wanted to show everyone online that her kids were getting the good life at the church picnic. She talked about picking a private school for them as if she was selecting destiny. Someone commented asking about Noah, and Tessa laughed lightly and said, "My sister's kid will be fine with public school. Bread builds character." She flipped her hair, adjusted the camera, and kept smiling as if she was a hero for acknowledging the existence of my son. The words sunk into my stomach like a stone. Bread builds character. A joke to her, but a wound to my child. Other parents at nearby tables tried not to look, but I saw the sympathy in one mother's eyes and embarrassment in another's. Doug added more fuel by saying Noah did not need fancy food or fancy school. He had Leah, responsible Leah who would pay for everything. People chuckled again, pretending it was light humor even though the message was ugly. Noah finished his sandwich, stood slowly, and asked if he could go sit in the car. I asked why, and he told me quietly, "My stomach hurts." I handed him the keys and watched him walk away across the grass, small and alone. Tessa did not notice, or maybe she did and did not care. When the event ended, Tessa's kids carried leftover pizza to their SUV. Doug handed out soda cans. Noah sat in the passenger seat of my car holding his water without opening it. His face was pale and his voice was flat when he said, "Can we go home?" On the drive back, he stared out the window at the desert passing by. The red rocks and cactus fields usually made him talk about science or geology, but he was silent. At a stoplight, he asked why they do not like us. It would have been easier to say they did that, it was all a misunderstanding. But Noah was 9 and smarter than people gave him credit for. I told him some people use jokes to make others feel small. He asked, why would family do that? I did not have an answer. When we got home, he went to his room. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the Wi-Fi router. The screen asked me to enter a network name. My reflection stared back at me from the dark microwave door. I typed, "Bread builds character guess mode." A tiny piece of rebellion, funny in a quiet way and strangely satisfying. I took a picture of the name on my phone. Another record. Another line in the growing file of indignities. That night, I checked my email inbox. Dozens of messages, but one stood out. A parent from the church sent a polite note saying she noticed how Noah was treated and wanted me to know she saw it and it was not right. Sometimes validation comes from strangers because family refuses to provide it. I replied briefly, thanking her. She ended her message saying, "You deserve better than crumbs." I closed my laptop and sat in the living room with the lights off. Noah came out a little later and curled up beside me on the couch. He rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "I do not like when they laugh." I told him I did not like it either. He asked what we would do about it. For the first time, he did not sound like a child. He sounded like someone who had already learned too much about humiliation. I told him the only thing that comforted me. We see everything. We remember everything. One day, we will not be the quiet ones anymore. He nodded and fell asleep with his head still on my shoulder. The next morning, life went on as if nothing happened. Tessa posted a photo from the picnic with a caption about family love. Richard and Diane commented with heart emojis. No mention of Noah. They did not know I had saved the live stream. They did not know every sentence was stored with date and time. They did not know the file called Quiet Boundaries was filling with evidence. And they definitely did not know that the quiet one had finally started keeping score. By May, the heat in Tempe settled over the city like a heavy blanket. The air conditioner in my apartment hummed through the afternoons while I worked from the kitchen table, reviewing payroll files and adjusting school accounts. Life should have felt ordinary, but every week brought a new reminder that Tessa and Doug enjoyed pushing boundaries just to see if I would react. One morning, Tessa texted asking to borrow my car because her check engine light came on and Doug needed their SUV. I said yes, even though I had a full day ahead. She promised to return it clean and full of gas. She brought it back that evening with a shrug and a smile. The tank registered barely above empty, and when I opened the trunk, I found a plastic grocery bag tied shut and dripping something sticky. Doug laughed from their porch and called out that at least they filled it. I checked the receipt left on the passenger seat and saw the pump charge for $7. $7. Enough to make the fuel light turn off, not enough to be courteous. I carried the trash bag to the dumpster and tried to shake the feeling that I had just been tested. A few days later, Diane called asking to borrow my Costco card. She said she needed only a few items. I handed it to her because handing things over had been my job since childhood. Later that night, I received an alert on my phone about a large purchase, $489. I looked at the emailed receipt. It was all snacks, frozen, pizzas, cases of soda, and bottles of alcohol. Tessa texted a photo of her kids standing next to a stack of boxes and wrote, "Look at our surprise haul." She added with a laughing emoji that I could afford it since I was the responsible one. Doug chimed in with a message saying she will pay it, she always does. I stared at the total on the screen and felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Responsible had become a curse. Responsible had become another word for exploited. I paid the bill because letting the balance sit would mess with my credit, and I needed my credit to stay clean for Noah. But I saved the receipt. I saved every receipt now. The next weekend, Noah had a soccer game. The team lined up along the bench while parents pressed up against the fence and shouted encouragement. Noah scored a goal in the second half and jogged back with a rare grin on his face. After the game, when kids ran around collecting snacks from coolers, Doug handed out little bags of chips and offered juice boxes to everyone except Noah. When Noah stepped forward, Doug said loud enough for other parents to hear, "Your mom cannot afford second plates." The phrase echoed the church picnic. Some kids giggled. Others looked uncomfortable. Noah's face fell and he walked back to me slowly. I knelt and told him we could get something on the way home. Inside, I was shaking, but I smiled for him. I told him he played with heart. He nodded and tried to look brave. On the drive home, he asked quietly if we could skip the next game. That night, after he went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, a laptop, and a cup of cold coffee. I wrote down 3 things. First, open a P.O. box to stop Tessa from using my address for her bills. Second, request a credit freeze with all major bureaus, so no one could open anything using my information. Third, remove Tessa and Doug from the AT&T family plan and separate my line. I spent the next week doing exactly that. The post office clerk handed me a P.O. box key and congratulated me like it was a small victory. It was. The credit freeze went through. AT&T processed the request. I felt a thin shield forming around me and my child. One afternoon after work, I checked my mailbox and found a white envelope stamped with a state seal. It was addressed to me but listed Noah in the subject line. Inside was a letter from a child services office. It said they received an anonymous report expressing concern that Noah might be undernourished. They scheduled a routine visit. My stomach dropped. I called Karen, my lawyer. She listened without interrupting and then told me calmly that family often abuses systems to punish someone who stops cooperating. She said we would cooperate fully and it would be resolved. When the caseworker arrived a week later, she was polite and professional. She inspected the kitchen, glanced at the stocked fridge, and chatted with Noah in the living room. He told her about his math club and his favorite books. After 30 minutes, she thanked us and left. 2 days later, I received the official notice. The case was closed, unfounded. I printed the letter and added it to the file. Another petty attempt to wound and another record to keep. That evening, I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. I titled it, Appetites and Accounts. Each row listed money-borrowed excuses given dates, times, and whether anything had been paid back. The Costco bill, the electric bill, the soccer snacks, the gas tank, the repairs I covered for their appliances, the borrowed card used for holidays. It was half petty and half survival. Watching the numbers line up in tidy columns felt like reclaiming power $1 at a time. I looked at the balance on my accounts and saw the quiet truth. Over 2 years, I had absorbed hundreds of little blows. They were not accidents, they were habits, and habits only grow when no one stops them. Noah came out of his room and asked what I was doing. I told him it was for work. He nodded and curled up on the couch with his tablet. He trusted me to fix things. He trusted me to be the strong one. I had been strong for so long, I almost forgot that strength can also mean drawing a line. Before bed, I checked my phone. Tessa had sent a string of messages asking if I could help pay a vet bill for their dog. She said Doug spent his paycheck on car parts. Then she sent a sad photo of the dog with a bandage. She ended with, "Please do not make us beg." I set the phone on silent. I could not erase the years of comments about bread-building character. I could not ignore the fact that they used my kindness to live comfortably while making my son feel small. The following morning, I found a box of old mail in front of my door. It held envelopes with my name on them, but the return addresses belonged to companies I did not recognize. One was a late notice from an apartment office in a different city. Someone had used my address to receive their bills. I looked closely and saw Tessa's name scribbled in the corner of one envelope where she had crossed it out. She must have given my address out to avoid her own late fees. I called the office and explained it was not my account. They updated their records and said they would notify the tenant. There it was. Another line in the spreadsheet, another nail in the coffin of silence. After dinner, Noah asked if we could bake cookies for his classmates. I said yes. We mixed batter and waited for the oven to beep. While we worked, he said softly, "I like being home." I asked him why, and he said, "Because nobody laughs at me here." I hugged him and felt the weight of every decision pressing against my shoulders. Protecting him meant changing the rules of this family. Protecting him meant I could not be the quiet, responsible one forever. The week after the soccer game, I woke up to a string of notifications that made my stomach turn. My phone buzzed with tags from people I did not know, and when I opened the first one, I saw a crowdfunding page with a banner that used my son's face. The title said, "Help my sisters, son, eat better." The main photo showed Noah holding a piece of bread from the church picnic, his head tipped down as if he were ashamed to look at the camera. Someone had taken that picture without my consent. The story under the photo was written in a syrupy tone that did not sound like concern. It sounded like performance. It said Noah often goes without proper meals and that the family is doing what we can, but his mother is too proud to accept help. It asked for donations to provide nutritious food and better opportunities. The goal was modest at first, a few $100s, but the counter already showed $2,380, raised by friends, and friends of friends who loved Tessa and believed she was a saint. Comments stacked up like confetti. "You are a hero. Poor baby." Some people tagged me and asked how they could help. Others wrote prayers. I scrolled and felt heat crawl across my cheeks. Pride was not the problem. Theft was the problem. Humiliation was the problem. The way the page used my child to polish a false image was the problem. I took screenshots of the entire thing, every sentence, every donor name, every comment. I saved the images to a folder that already had a name waiting for them. Quiet boundaries. Then I called Karen. She listened quietly while I explained the page. When I said the amount raised $2,380, she repeated it slowly, as if to weigh it in her mouth. She told me to report it immediately to the platform for misrepresentation and to send her everything so she could prepare a letter if needed. Her last sentence sounded like a promise. "We will get this taken down." I opened the platform's help center and filled out the form with steady hands. I explained that the organizer was my sister, that the statements were false, that the photo was taken without permission, and that the money was not going to Noah. I attached screenshots of Tessa bragging about pizza and private school. I added a link to the public live stream where she had said, "Bread builds character." Then I sent a separate report to Trust and Safety with the same evidence labeling it misuse of image and misrepresentation of beneficiary. When I finished, I sat very still and listened to the refrigerator hum. The apartment felt like a witness. Noah was at a friend's house for a play date, and for a moment I let my shoulders shake, not from tears but from the slow exhale of someone who finally presses the emergency stop. An hour later, Tessa called and left a voicemail that began with laughter and ended with accusation. She said, "See, I care about your kid more than you do." She said I should be grateful that people were donating. She said I could not afford to be proud. She ended with, "You are welcome." I forwarded the voicemail to Karen and then deleted it from my phone because I did not want it living there any longer than it had to. By evening, the page had crossed 2,400 with a new caption update saying that Noah would soon be eating better thanks to community love. The comment section turned giddy. Someone promised to drop off groceries. Another person asked for our address. Tessa replied in public to that person and said, "Send them to me first, and I will deliver." That sentence told me everything I needed to know about where the money and the gifts would go. I made more screenshots. I labeled the files with the date and time. The next morning, an email from the platform appeared. "Thank you for your report. We are reviewing the campaign." A second email from Trust and Safety asked for any proof that the child was not food insecure. I sent copies of the Child Services letter from the week before that stated the case was unfounded. I sent photos of the stocked pantry and fridge. I attached a copy of the school lunch account showing a positive balance. I included the clip from the public live stream where Tessa mocked the idea of my child needing more. The case agent wrote back quickly, "Thank you. We will proceed." That afternoon, the campaign disappeared. Every public link returned a page not found message. Another email landed in my inbox confirming that donations were being refunded to all contributors due to misrepresentation and issues with consent. I sat at the table and let the news settle. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like oxygen. One of the donors who had commented earlier wrote to me privately and apologized. She said she did not know the full story and that she was embarrassed to have shared it. She added a line that made me feel seen. "The way you stayed quiet is not weakness. It is strength with receipts." I thanked her. When Tessa realized the page was gone, she started texting and calling without pause. First, she accused me of sabotaging help. Then she called me cruel. Then she claimed I had shamed the family. Her last message said, "This is why we never get ahead, and it is your fault." I did not respond. I opened my banking app and sent a payment of 1 cent to Tessa through Zelle with a memo that read, "For Noah's plate." It was small and petty, and more satisfying than I expected. A minute later, she replied with a string of angry messages that I refused to read. Instead, I went to the kitchen and brewed tea. When the kettle clicked off, I stood by the window and watched the parking lot glow under the streetlights. Noah came home from his playdate chattering about a science kit he and his friend had built. He did not know anything about the campaign. I did not tell him. The burden of adult lies should never sit on a child's shoulders. After dinner, I opened my phone and added a new album photo of the Zelle confirmation. The folder, Quiet Boundaries, had grown dense. Screenshots of the campaign, the refund notice, the voicemail transcription where Tessa boasted about caring more than I did, the livestream clip, the Costco receipt, the SRP payment, the soccer field insult. Each item was plain and factual. No insults, no commentary, only the evidence of behavior repeated over time. 2 days later, an email arrived from the bank that managed the UTMA. It referenced my earlier inquiry and said they had begun a formal review into the March withdrawal to Doug Hale. The message described the account purpose in neutral language and asked for any additional documentation showing that the funds were not used in the best interest of the minor. I forwarded the email to Karen with every record attached and asked what the next steps would be. She replied that the bank review could lead to a repayment or to a civil settlement that would formalize a plan. She told me we were in a good position. She also told me not to speak to anyone about it without her present. I agreed easily. I had learned that silence is only useful when it is chosen. That night before bed, I scrolled through the album one more time. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of the phone, but because of the story it contained. A child offered bread, while others ate pizza. A campaign that tried to turn humiliation into cash. a family who called exploitation love. I closed the album and placed the phone face down on the table. Tomorrow I would go to work, review payrolls, and sign consent slips for Noah's next field trip. The world would look the same, but something fundamental had shifted. They had crossed a line they did not even admit existed. I had drawn one I would not let them cross again. July in Phoenix carries a heat that presses on your shoulders like a hand, and on the afternoon of the cookout, the air wavered over the driveway as if everything were melting. Richard and Diane had strung pastel lights across the fence and pulled out the big grill, the one they saved for holidays and moments when they wanted to impress neighbors. Long tables waited under patio umbrellas, loaded with ribs, kebabs, macaroni dishes, and bowls of chips. The smell of smoke and sugar mixed in the air. People laughed, plates clattered, coolers slammed shut. I arrived with Noah 10 minutes early and brought a small fruit tray, the kind I knew kids liked. Diane glanced at it and said without looking at me that there was already plenty of food. It sounded like an announcement, not hospitality. I kept the tray on the edge of a table and told Noah to sit wherever he liked. He spotted 2 cousins playing with water guns and asked if he could join. I nodded. He ran off with a shy grin. For a few minutes, I let myself believe we might get through a family event without someone turning it into a spectacle, but that hope lasted only until Doug walked past me carrying a plate piled high with ribs. He glanced at the fruit tray and smirked. Still on that budget thing, Leah. Before I could answer, he walked away laughing at something Tessa whispered. I stayed quiet and helped Diane bring out a stack of paper plates. She passed one to a man I did not know and skipped me entirely. When Richard called everyone to line up for food, the kids rushed forward and I looked for Noah. He stood near the grill waiting patiently. When his turn came, Tessa cut in front of him. She handed him a paper plate that was so thin it bent in the middle. On it sat half a hamburger bun and a single pickle slice. She said he could come back for more later if there was any left. Noah stared at the bun, his face still. Doug laughed loudly and said, "Budget plate for budget mom." Several people chuckled. Diane added, "It is not our job to feed your kid." Someone else echoed that children need discipline. I watched Noah walk slowly toward the open trunk of my car, holding the plate with both hands so it would not tip. He placed it inside and then climbed into the back seat, shutting the door behind him. I excused myself and crossed the yard. I pretended to check something in the trunk, but what I found was my 9-year-old sitting in the dark interior, hands pressed to his eyes. His shoulders shook without sound. The plate sat beside him untouched. I slid into the passenger side and did not speak. I did not wipe his tears or ask him if he was all right, because the answer was obvious. He leaned his head against my arm and tried to breathe normally, but the breaths came ragged and tight. Through the rear window, I could see people filling their mouths with barbecue and laughing. A cousin poured lemonade over ice and offered refills to everyone but us. Noah whispered, "Can we go home?" I nodded and told him he could stay in the car with the air conditioning on while I got my purse. When I stepped out, Doug lifted his drink in my direction and said, "There she goes again," with her dramatic exits. I looked at him for a second. No anger, no response, just silence, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because they cannot feed on it. I walked inside the house, grabbed my purse from the counter, and headed back through the yard. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said goodbye. As I buckled my seatbelt, I looked in the mirror and saw Noah curled against the window, eyes red, mouth tight. That image burned deeper than any insult they had thrown. We drove home without music. The silence felt heavy but honest. When we got inside, Noah went straight to his room. I heated leftovers from the night before and brought a plate to his desk. He ate slowly, still quiet. After he finished, he asked if he could sleep in my room. I said yes. He curled under my blanket and fell asleep fast. His chest rose and fell unevenly the way kids breathe when they are exhausted from holding in hurt. I sat at the edge of the bed and stared into the hallway where the nightlight painted a soft glow on the carpet. Something inside me had shifted at that cookout. It was not rage. It was not humiliation. It was something calmer and sharper, a decision without a speech. I walked to the dining table, opened my laptop, and began printing. Costco receipts, AT&T family plan logs showing unpaid balances charged to me, the GoFundMe refund email with its clinical wording about misrepresentation, the UTMA statement with the withdrawal to Doug. I laid each page on the table as if I were building a map for someone else to follow. The pages made a soft whisper as they slid across the wood. Then my phone buzzed. It was Karen. She asked if I had time to talk. I stepped onto the balcony so I would not wake Noah. She told me the bank reviewing the UTMA had completed its initial phase and found enough concern to start a formal case. She said the likely outcome would be a repayment order or a civil settlement that required scheduled deposits back into the account. She spoke slowly, letting each word settle. When she finished, she said, "This is moving forward. You are not imagining any of this. The law is on your side." I thanked her and told her about the cookout. I told her about the half bun, the paper plate, the way Noah hid in the car. My voice did not shake, not because I was calm, but because something inside me had gone still the way a lake goes still before a storm. Karen said I was doing the right thing by documenting everything. She reminded me to save any messages, any screenshots, any receipts. She said you do not have to shout to be heard in court. The truth is loud enough. After we hung up, I returned to the table and opened a fresh document. I wrote a timeline. Every date, every bill, every insult, every piece of evidence. I titled the document simply, Records. The printer kept working until the stack of papers fanned out like a deck of cards. Just after midnight, I walked back into the bedroom. Noah had shifted in his sleep, his hand reaching toward the empty side of the bed. I lay beside him and his fingers curled around mine automatically. His warmth was small but real, and in the darkness I understood something clearly. They could mock me without end. They could starve my peace. They could scrape dignity off every plate in that backyard. But they had taken the first bite out of my child. That was the last time they would ever taste his hurt. When I finally closed my eyes, I did not replay the insults. I replayed the quiet, the silence I had chosen instead of begging for decency. The silence that had always been mistaken for weakness would now become the sharpest tool I owned. The next morning, I packed Noah's lunch with grapes and peanut butter crackers and left a note in his bag that said, "You are enough." He smiled when he saw it. I asked him if he wanted to go to school or stay home. He said he wanted to go. He said he felt better. On my way to work, I stopped at the post office and rented a small P.O. box. I filled out a change of address form for any bills tied to my name. I called AT&T and began the process of separating my line from the family plan. The representative asked why. I answered with one sentence. It is time to be responsible for only myself and my son. That evening after dinner, I added the cookout details to the album Quiet Boundaries. I typed a simple caption, July, backyard, half bun, no tears left. Then I saved it. By the time I closed my laptop, I felt the first hint of something that had been missing for a long time. Not joy, not victory, control, quiet control. If this was your child, would you keep quiet or would you take action? August of 2025 brought a monsoon sky over Scottsdale low clouds, pressing against the mountains like storm bruises. But inside the Civic Center, the air felt crisp and bright, cooled by heavy conditioners and polished by good intentions. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage, floral banners hung behind a podium, and a table of plaques gleamed under spotlights. The Community Support Award was meant to celebrate educators and school staff who contributed to the district beyond their job descriptions. I sat near the back with Noah. He swung his feet nervously and asked how long the ceremony would take. I told him it would be quick. He did not know I had prepared for this night more carefully than any holiday dinner or family event. When my name was called, a small round of applause rose, mostly polite, a few proud parents clapping harder, because they recognized my face from PTA nights and food drives. I walked to the stage in a navy dress I had worn only twice in my life. My palms did not sweat. My voice did not shake. I could feel Karen somewhere in the audience, and Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura sat near the aisle already watching Tessa and Doug stare at me with smirking confusion, as if they could not imagine why I was receiving anything other than a lecture about being more grateful. One board member read a short speech about community spirit and financial literacy workshops I had helped with at the school. They handed me a plaque and asked if I wanted to say a few words. People usually give short scripted thank you lines, but I stepped to the microphone and said that I did have something to share. I tapped a button on the remote in my hand. Behind me, the screen lit up with the first slide: Costco receipt, date, amount, purchases. A quiet wave moved across the room as people recognized the familiar store name and the number at the bottom, $489. No context yet. I let the silence breathe. Next slide. AT&T Family Plan Activity Log. 4 lines on the plan, 1 payer. My name, my account. Late fees because someone kept skipping payments without telling me. Eyes shifted toward Tessa, who sat perfectly still. Next slide. Screenshot of the GoFundMe page, titled, "Help My Sister's Son Eat Better." Photo of Noah eating a dry piece of bread at the church picnic, words typed to the world suggesting neglect that did not exist. I did not narrate. I let the room read it on their own. The quiet in that hall felt different from any silence I had ever known in my family's house. This silence was alert, heavy, awake. I clicked again. The refund notification from GoFundMe's Trust and Safety team. Every dollar returned. Account flagged, more shifting in seats, more glances at Tessa. A parent covered her mouth with her hand. I continued. Next slide. UTMA withdrawal record. Custodian Richard Monroe. Beneficiary Noah Monroe. Transfer of $4,800 to account belonging to Doug Hale. Memo family fix. Someone in the second row gasped. I could see the shock ripple like a dropped stone hitting water. Tessa's face lost its smile. Doug's hand gripped his thigh. The board members on stage with me exchanged confused glances. I raised the remote again and clicked the final slide. Audio waveform appeared. The caption read, "Public live stream, April 2025. Then the sound played through the hall speakers. Tessa's voice, bright and bragging, said my sister's kid will be fine with public school. Bread builds character. A few people who had never heard the phrase before looked horrified, but many had been at that church picnic. They remembered the moment. They remembered the camera pointed at the table. They remembered Noah sitting alone. The audio ended. The room went still. Not one laugh, not one polite cough. Just stillness, like the air had been vacuumed out. I looked at the audience and spoke clearly. I said this award means a lot because community should be built on dignity, not crumbs. Then I added one more sentence. Do not worry about me. I keep receipts. The words did not sound cruel. They sounded factual, calm, balanced, like a door closing without force. I stepped back from the microphone and handed the remote to the technician. A reporter from the district newspaper raised a hand and asked quietly, "Is this your family?" The question hung in the air. Before I could answer, Tessa shoved her chair back. The legs screeched against the floor. People turned as she rushed toward the exit, almost tripping over her own purse. Doug did not move at first. He stared at the screen where his name rested beside a $4,800 withdrawal. Someone whispered, "Unbelievable." Another person muttered, "I knew something was off." Doug finally stood. He looked around as though expecting someone to defend him. No one did. He shuffled after Tessa, shoulders stiff, face drained of color. As the door swung closed behind them, the board member next to me whispered, "I am so sorry." I nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said. The ceremony continued because life always continues, but the mood had changed. When I returned to my seat, parents leaned in to shake my hand. A mother I barely knew squeezed my arm and said, "I am proud of you." Another whispered, "You protected your boy." The room felt smaller, safer. Noah looked up at me, eyes wide, and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" I told him no. You did everything right. When the ceremony ended, people gathered near the exit. Tessa and Doug were nowhere in sight. Richard and Diane stood near a wall, pale and rigid. Richard avoided my eyes. Diane clutched her purse like a shield. They looked smaller than they ever had in my memory. For once, there was no lecture, no guilt, no manipulation, just quiet. We walked outside into warm desert air. The storm clouds had not broken yet. The sun peeked through them, bright and steady. Noah grabbed my hand and swung it gently. He asked if we could get ice cream on the way home. I said yes. On the drive, he hummed while I replayed the evening. Not the humiliation, not the years of being ignored. I replayed the moment the room went silent. The moment people saw the truth for themselves. Not because I yelled, not because I begged, because I documented, because I kept receipts. That night, after Noah fell asleep with chocolate on his lips and peace on his face, I sat at the kitchen table and placed the plaque beside the stack of documents I had printed weeks earlier. I realized something. Justice does not always come with judges and gavels. Sometimes it comes in a slideshow with a microphone. Sometimes it comes in the eyes of people who finally see. And the most surprising part was that it did not feel like revenge. It felt like release. It felt like the first full breath after years of breathing shallow. The storm outside never broke. The sky stayed heavy, but the world inside my home lightened. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and whispered into the dark. We are done being small. The morning after the ceremony, the sky finally opened and rain washed the dust off every driveway in Scottsdale. I woke to the sound of water tapping the windows and a soft alert from my phone. At first, I thought it was just another news notification, but when I opened the screen, I saw an email from GoFundMe. The subject line read, "Case reviewed and processed." I opened it and read every word. The funds from the campaign titled, "Help My Sister's Son Eat Better," had been fully refunded to donors, and the organizer account was flagged for misrepresentation. There was no anger in the email, just facts. Cold, precise, permanent. I took a slow sip of coffee while the rain streaked the glass. A tiny part of me wondered if Tessa had opened her email yet, and whether she felt the first crack of consequences pressing back. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store with Noah and picked up milk and bread. When we returned, an envelope was taped to my door. It was from the City of Phoenix Code Compliance Office. When I opened it inside the kitchen, the paper smelled like toner and humidity. The message was brief. Following a routine review of social media content, the backyard cookout held at Richard and Diane Monroe's residence had been conducted without the proper food service permit. The fine was $850, payment due in 30 days. Someone must have reported it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone from church. I was not responsible for the fine, and the letter was addressed to Richard and Diane, but the timing felt poetic. That cookout had been the moment they stripped Noah of dignity. The city just stripped them of party money. I folded the letter and placed it in my folder of records. Not my fight, not my problem. By evening, another message arrived. This one was from the VFW Post in Tempe, where Tessa had been volunteering for photo ops and community brownie points. The message said the Post was grateful for her past help, but given recent confusion and concern about public image, they would temporarily suspend use of her media on promotional materials. The email was polite, gentle, almost apologetic, but the meaning was clear. Her reputation had a dent that could not be polished away overnight. I sat on the couch with Noah sleeping beside me, curled like a kitten. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. For the first time in many years, I felt the strange sensation of not needing to anticipate the next family blow. I did not check my phone every minute. I did not brace myself for Tessa's voice or Diane's lectures. I just breathed. 2 days later, I received a letter from the Better Business Bureau. Someone had reported a complaint involving a small online resale account under Tessa's name that listed my home address as the return location for disputed goods. Because of that complaint, the profile now displayed a C rating and a recommendation for address verification. I read the letter twice. All the years Diane lectured me about responsibility, all the times Tessa boasted about connections, and now a rating agency was warning others to use caution. I set the letter down, poured another cup of coffee, and smiled without guilt. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Karen. Her voice held the tone of someone delivering a final verdict. She said the UTMA investigation had concluded and Noah would receive a repayment plan. Doug had already signed the agreement. 12 months of repayments until the full $4,800 was restored. I asked what would happen if they defaulted. Karen said interest penalties and another round of legal action. But she did not think Doug would risk that now. She emailed me a notarized copy of the repayment schedule. It felt like a small brick being lifted off my chest. I opened Noah's 529 account and transferred the first repayment deposit, $450, into the fund. The confirmation window popped up on the screen. Future secure. Money locked. I watched the numbers change and felt something new settle inside me. After years of being treated like I was the family wallet, I had finally built a vault that did not have a door they could kick open. The next morning, I blocked Tessa's number. Then I blocked Diane. Not a speech, not a warning, just silence. The kind that closes gates. My phone went from dozens of buzzing interruptions to a stillness I had forgotten existed. No more messages demanding help. No more guilt dressed as advice. No more late-night voicemails accusing me of tearing the family apart. I walked to the balcony with a cup of tea. The desert sky had cleared and the air was crisp. For the first time in months, my hands were not shaking. That evening, Noah asked if he could help cook dinner. We chopped vegetables together while music played low on the speaker. He sprinkled cheese on pasta and told me about a science project he wanted to build. He spoke without hesitation, without fear, without the heaviness that had followed him all summer. I listened and realized something. Children know when storms are over, even if no one announces it. He finished his pasta and went to his room to draw. I stood in the kitchen and looked around my apartment. Everything was small but peaceful. The fruit tray from the cookout sat in the refrigerator. I opened the door, pulled it out, and ate a strawberry. It tasted sweet. No bitterness, no afterthought, just food, just mine. Later that night, Uncle Frank called. He told me he was proud of how I handled everything. He said strength does not always shout. Sometimes it just stops paying for other people's mistakes. Aunt Laura got on the phone and asked if Noah wanted to join their family hiking trip in the fall. I told her yes. Noah would love that. Before bed, I checked the mailbox. The city permit fine notice for Richard and Diane sat inside, folded and official. I placed it with the other letters in a box labeled Archive. I was not collecting receipts out of spite anymore. I was collecting them out of clarity. The universe sometimes delivers justice quietly, not with fireworks, not with applause, but with paperwork, refunds, ratings, and signatures. That night, I slept without waking once. No nightmares, no tension in my jaw. I had imagined revenge would feel hot or explosive or dramatic. Instead, it felt like turning the volume down on a radio that had been screaming for years. And in the silence, I finally heard my own breath. September arrived with cooler mornings and a hint of fall in the desert air. The heat backed away just enough that you could drink coffee on the balcony without feeling like the sun was breathing down your neck. School routines settled in, and Noah's confidence returned piece by piece. One Tuesday evening after dinner, while Noah worked on a math puzzle at the kitchen table, my laptop chimed. The subject line read, "We need your help, Leah." I already knew who it was before opening it. Doug wrote that Tessa had lost her temporary job, and they were struggling with rent for October. He said since we were family, I could cover it until they got back on their feet. He added a sentence that made my chest tighten with the familiar script. "You have always been the responsible one." It sounded almost complimentary, like generosity was my assigned role, written into my birth certificate. Then a second email came from Tessa. Her message was longer, full of half apologies and thin excuses. She said they had been under pressure, that things were rough, that she needed me. She said family sticks together. She said I owed them at least this much. I stared at the screen, not with sadness, not with anger, just with clarity. Months earlier, those words would have cut deep. They would have stirred guilt and duty. Now they floated like dust that could not settle. I opened a new document and typed something simple. Checklist for respect. Then I wrote 4 points. 1. Public apology at church. Spoken clearly, no fake tears, no excuses. 2. Repayment of every dollar I ever spotted them, every bill, every grocery run, every borrowed tank of gas. 3. No contact with Noah for 60 days, not a visit, not a call, not a message. 4. Delete the live stream and every public insult they ever posted. I read the list twice. It did not sound cruel. It sounded balanced. Fair. I attached the document to my email and wrote a single sentence. These are my terms. If you cannot agree, ask someone else. Within minutes, my phone rang. Tessa's number flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. On the 4th call, I answered. Her voice was high and furious. She said I was being dramatic, selfish, heartless. She said nobody in the family understood what had gotten into me. I said nothing until she finally breathed. Then I repeated my terms, calm, even. She shouted, "You are tearing this family apart." I replied, "I am just ending my part in it." That sentence made her voice break. She demanded to know how I could be so cold. I reminded her that she had fed my son half a bun on a paper plate while her kids ate full meals. She tried to talk over me, but I kept going. I reminded her about the GoFundMe, the UTME withdrawal, the CPS report, the jokes, the humiliation, the notes I took when no one else was listening. She said it was all in the past. I told her it had not been past for Noah. The silence on the line felt like someone holding their breath underwater. Then Doug grabbed the phone. He tried a different tactic. He lowered his voice and spoke like a peacemaker. He said we were all family and family forgives mistakes. He said they could not lose the house. He said their kids would suffer. I asked plainly why their children mattered more than mine. He did not answer that. Instead, he cursed. A quick, ugly word that died in the ear. I said the same sentence again. These are my terms. And I hung up. I expected a storm. I expected door pounding or hateful messages or dramatic threats. But nothing came. The silence stretched across 2 days. On the 3rd day, I received a short email. Doug wrote that they would not be following any checklist and that I was turning into someone unrecognizable. He said I needed to remember where I came from. I deleted the message and blocked his address. On Friday, Uncle Frank called to check in. I told him everything. He listened quietly and then laughed softly. He said they finally tested the wrong woman. Aunt Laura got on the phone and said boundaries are the deepest form of love you can give to yourself. That evening, Noah and I made pizza at home. Real pizza. With cheese, tomatoes, and dough, we stretched ourselves. He topped his half with pepperoni slices and small pieces of pineapple. After he took his first bite, he joked, "This plate does not look like bread builds character." We both laughed. It felt good to laugh. Later that night, I added the email screenshot to the Quiet Boundaries album. I wrote a caption, "September, finally done." Over the next week, life continued normally. I went to work. I paid bills. I read bedtime stories. And slowly, something registered in my mind. No arguments, no guilt, no emotional chaos, just quiet. When a phone stays silent long enough, you start to realize how loud it used to be. One Sunday at church, Tessa walked in alone. She avoided my eyes. Her cheeks were pale and her posture hunched. People whispered. The live stream video had vanished from her page. The GoFundMe link was gone. But the memory remained in the eyes of everyone who had seen it. The pastor greeted me kindly. Noah sat next to me and drew shapes on the back of the program. After service ended, Tessa approached. Her voice trembled when she said, "Can we talk?" I told her I did not have time. She asked again, softer. She said, "Please." She said she needed her sister. For a moment, I saw the girl she used to be, lost, tired, desperate. But I also saw the woman who laughed when my son was mocked, the woman who used my address to hide bills, the woman who called CPS out of spite. I said no. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it. She turned away and walked out. People watched her leave. I reached down and took Noah's hand. We walked to the car together. On the drive home, he asked if everything was okay. I told him yes. We are okay. That night, I cooked lemon chicken and mashed potatoes. Noah set the table. He poured milk into 2 glasses. The world felt ordinary in the best possible way. After he went to bed, I sat on the couch and stared at the dark television screen. It occurred to me that revenge does not always demand retaliation. Sometimes revenge is refusing to be used again. It is choosing your peace and letting other people sit in their own noise. I felt no guilt, no second guessing, no ache, just space, clean and quiet. For the first time in years, I realized that ending a relationship can be an act of mercy. Maybe not for them, but for me, and for my child. Thanksgiving arrived with a soft chill in the Arizona air, the kind that made you open windows in the afternoon and pull blankets a little tighter at night. By late November, the world felt different in small, quiet ways. The phone stayed silent. The mailbox held only bills with my name on them, nothing forwarded for someone else, and Noah seemed lighter, as if the weight on his small shoulders had finally lifted. We drove to Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura's house carrying a pumpkin pie and a tray of roasted vegetables. Their home sat on a patch of land west of Phoenix, where the desert opened wide and the sky looked endless, even on cloudy days. When we stepped inside, the kitchen smelled like sage and butter, the familiar Thanksgiving scent that smells like family should. Noah ran off to help Laura finish the green bean casserole while I set the pie on the counter. Frank walked in from the backyard where he had been smoking a turkey. His face lit up when he saw us. He hugged me the way a father might, firm and steady. He hugged Noah a little longer. Dinner was simple, warm and full. The kind of dinner where people talk about the past in stories instead of wounds. We sat at a wooden table covered in an old floral cloth. Noah filled his plate without hesitation. Mashed potatoes, turkey cornbread gravy. He did not pause or ask if there was enough. He just ate. Halfway through the meal, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, our plates are always full here." His voice was soft but sure, and for a moment I had to put down my fork and breathe. I had never needed revenge. This was enough. After dessert, Frank disappeared down the hallway and returned holding a small envelope. He placed it in front of me and said, "We wanted you to have this." Inside was a single sheet of paper with an embossed county seal. Guardianship affirmed. If anything happens to you, we have Noah. The legal language was simple and final. My throat tightened. I could not speak at first. Laura put her hand over mine and said, "You are not alone in the world, even if your parents try to make you feel like you are." Noah leaned against my shoulder while I read the document twice, letting the meaning settle. I was no longer trapped in a family where love depended on obedience. I had built a new one, a quieter one, a safer one. That night, as we packed leftovers into containers to take home, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. A deposit had been made, $450 exactly, the second payment in the 12-month repayment plan. Doug never sent a message explaining it. No apology, no justification, just the money. The silence felt appropriate. When we got home, I logged into the 529 account and transferred the payment. The growing balance glowed on the screen, a quiet future solidifying with each deposit. Noah brushed his teeth and put on pajamas while I changed the Wi-Fi name again. Not bread, real food. It made me laugh a little, not out of spite, but out of freedom. The next morning, Noah padded into the kitchen in socks and asked for pancakes. We cooked them together while sunlight spilled across the floor. No tension, No anxious listening for a phone call, just breakfast. Later that week, we bought a small artificial Christmas tree from a thrift store. Noah decorated it with silver garland and glittery stars. When he stepped back to admire it, he said, "This house feels like ours now." I knew exactly what he meant. When children feel safe, their voices change. Their shoulders relax. They sleep deeper. Peace settles into the bones of a home the way warmth settles into bread. One evening in December, I stopped by the grocery store after work. Near the produce section, I saw Diane. She looked older, smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of her confidence. She stared at a pile of apples, pretending to compare them. I walked past her without slowing down. For the first time in my life, I did not stop to comfort her, reassure her, or shrink myself so she could feel big. I just walked, and she let me. In the parking lot, I sat in the car for a moment staring at the steering wheel. Not angry, not triumphant, just done. Some victories do not look like fireworks. Some look like walking past the people who once controlled you and feeling nothing at all. A few days before Christmas, Noah and I drove to Prescott for a weekend getaway. We rented a tiny cabin near a lake where pine trees crowded the sky and the world smelled like cold water and wood smoke. We roasted marshmallows outside on a small fire pit. Noah burned his first one, laughed, then tried again until he made a perfect golden brown. He handed it to me with both hands and said, "Taste it." I did. It was warm and sweet and messy, everything childhood should be. We sat quietly watching the fire crackle and rise in orange sparks. The air was so still that I could hear him breathing. After a long silence, he said, "Mom, do you feel lighter?" I nodded. I told him sometimes the heaviest thing you ever carry is the idea that you owe people who hurt you. When you let that go, you make space for better things. He leaned against my arm and said, "I like better things." When we got back home, I started a small tradition, something simple. Every Sunday morning, we cooked a breakfast we could not afford a year ago. Waffles, fresh berries, real maple syrup. Noah set the table with plates instead of paper. He poured milk without worrying about wasting it. And each time we sat down, he smiled. Sometimes justice looks like courtrooms and judges. But sometimes it looks like a child who finally knows that no one will take food out of his hands again. The days rolled on into the new year and life stayed quiet. There were no grand apologies from Richard, no tearful confessions from Diane, no dramatic speeches from Tessa. Just silence, the kind that used to scare me. Now it sounded peaceful. One night I settled on the couch with a blanket and scrolled through the Quiet Boundaries album. Screenshots, receipts, emails, records, proof of everything I survived. I realized I did not need them anymore. Not for defense, not for revenge, just as a reminder of what I would never return to. I closed the album and set my phone down. Noah came in with 2 cups of hot chocolate. He climbed beside me and asked if we could watch a movie. I said yes. We watched something silly and light. Halfway through, Noah rested his head on my shoulder, the way he used to when he was small. The heat from his mug rose in soft steam between us. Outside, the world went dark and quiet. Inside our home, it felt full. Our plates were full. Our hearts were full. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had finally gone home. January brought a pale winter sun to Arizona, the kind that warms the pavement without ever feeling hot. The new year slid quietly into place, and for the first time in a long time, the world did not feel like it was waiting to collapse. On the first Monday after New Year's, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened Noah's 529 account. The repayment deposits from Doug had continued on schedule, quiet and mechanical. Each one arrived without apology, without explanation, just numbers transferring from one place to another. By now, the full amount from the UTMA withdrawal had been replaced. I stared at the balance and felt something calm and deep settle in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just relief. I clicked the button to officially lock the account from withdrawal without my authorization. A confirmation box popped up on the screen asking if I wanted to proceed. I pressed confirm and watched the screen refresh. The future, once treated like a piggy bank for other people's emergencies, was now sealed shut for my son. It felt like placing a solid roof over his head that no storm could lift. Later that week, I received a call from the district office. The payroll coordinator position I had applied for months earlier had finally opened. The voice on the line sounded cheerful, almost excited, when she told me the job was mine if I wanted it. Better pay, better hours, more stability. I accepted without hesitation. When I told Noah, he hugged me and asked if that meant more waffles on Sundays. I laughed and told him yes. It meant more waffles, more field trips, more nights where we did not have to count receipts like they were talismans against disaster. On my first day in the new role, I sat at a desk that was slightly too big and smelled faintly of furniture polish. I organized files, reviewed payroll logs, and learned new systems. At lunch, some of the teachers came by to congratulate me. One of them whispered, "You earned this, not you got lucky, not you should be grateful. You earned this." It had been a long time since I heard those words from anyone in my family. That night, after dinner, I opened the Quiet Boundaries album for the last time. Screenshot after screenshot, emails, receipts, letters, proof of survival, proof of endurance, proof that silence had never meant weakness. I scrolled to the first photo in the album, the bread basket at the restaurant, the night everything began. It felt so far away now, like a memory from someone else's life. I did not delete the album, but I closed it knowing I did not need it as armor anymore. 2 weeks later, while Noah worked on a science kit in the living room, my phone buzzed. A message from Tessa. 3 words. "Can we talk?" She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge the harm. She did not ask about Noah. Just a quiet request from a woman who had once believed I would always open the door, no matter how many times she slammed it in my face. I read the message, set my phone down, and walked to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. When I came back, the screen had gone dark. I tapped it awake and looked at the message again. The typing bubble flickered and disappeared. I did not respond. Not with anger, not with kindness, not with anything at all. I simply left it on scene. The silence felt like a full sentence. In February, Noah received an invitation to a school science fair. He wanted to build a miniature bridge made of popsicle sticks and glue. We spent an entire weekend cutting, measuring, and sanding tiny pieces until our kitchen smelled like craft glue and sawdust. When he finished his project, he held it up proudly and said, "It is strong. It can hold weight." I smiled because he was not just talking about the bridge. At the fair, his bridge won second place. When they announced his name, he looked for me in the crowd and grinned wide and bright, like the sun had returned to his face. After the ceremony, he whispered, "This is the best year ever." We celebrated with ice cream chocolate, for him vanilla for me. On the drive home, he talked about becoming an engineer someday. Not maybe, not if, someday. One weekend in March, we decided to clean the apartment. I opened the hall closet and pulled out an old box filled with medical bills, expired coupons, and envelopes from the years when every month felt like a balancing act. Noah helped me sort through them. At the bottom of the box, we found the letter my mother wrote 35 years ago, the one I discovered after the CPS visit. I read the final line again. "I do not think I will ever bond with this second child. I am too tired to try." Once those words felt like a wound carved into bone. Now they looked like a relic from a world I had escaped. I folded the letter, placed it in a small envelope, and wrote quietly on the front, "Not my inheritance." Then I dropped it into the trash. Healing is not dramatic. Sometimes it is a soft choice in a quiet room. By spring, life settled into smooth rhythms. Work, school, dinner, laughter, sleep. No chaos, no manipulation, just normal living, the kind I once thought belonged only to other families. One night, Noah sat beside me on the couch reading a library book. He leaned his head against my arm and said, "You seem happy." I answered, "I am." He nodded and said, "I like this version of us." The room was silent except for the turning of pages and the faint hum of the dishwasher. It occurred to me then that I had spent so many years trying to earn a family that did not want me. I never realized I was already building one of my own. In April, the district hosted another community dinner. People brought homemade dishes, and children ran around under string lights. A few parents asked how Noah was doing. I told them he was thriving. When someone asked if my parents would be attending, I said no. There was no shame in my voice, no apology, just truth. After dinner, we drove home with leftovers wrapped in foil. In the parking lot, a cool breeze swept across the desert sky. Noah jumped over cracks in the pavement and laughed. When we reached the apartment door, he looked up and said, "This is my favorite home." I unlocked the door, turned on the kitchen light, and set the leftovers on the counter. The world felt ordinary in the best way. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. The message from Tessa was still there. "Can we talk?" Still unanswered, still on scene. I plugged in my phone, turned off the light, and crawled under the blankets. Noah slept in the room across the hall, breathing softly. I closed my eyes and listened. Not for danger, not for drama, just for the sound of a peaceful house, for the gentle proof that freedom does not always look like fireworks or declarations. Sometimes freedom looks like a full refrigerator and a locked college fund and a child who no longer flinches at family gatherings. Sometimes freedom looks like walking away and never looking back. And sometimes freedom looks like a single ignored message on a quiet phone. Have you ever chosen peace over family drama? Comment your state. I am listening.